On an autumn night in Manhattan, as the streets filled with leaves swept by the cold wind, an unlikely scene unfolded inside the gleaming Maison Aurelia. At the center of the immaculate hall, among crystal glasses and refined dishes, a little girl in a simple dress, cared for as if it were her greatest treasure, blew out the flickering flame of a makeshift candle stuck into a small display cake. Beside her, her father watched with tenderness, ignoring the judgmental glances that spread across the surrounding tables. The contrast was brutal, the simplicity of a whispered birthday against the weight of arrogant ostentation. Some turned their faces away with disdain, others murmured uncomfortably, but one waitress stood firm, looking at the pair with respect and warmth. Further back, almost hidden in the shadows of the hall, a distinguished lady observed in silence, recording every detail in a small leather notebook. The scene felt like a spark ready to ignite the room, fragile, humble, and true, simmering beneath the polished surface of luxury, ready to explode at any moment. The glass doors of Maison Aurelia swung open, and the silence of the hall seemed to bow for an instant. A simple man and a little girl in a worn dress crossed the crimson carpet, drawing glances that were impossible to disguise. Silverware froze in midair, conversations were cut short, and even the piano in the background seemed to lose its rhythm. The stares were immediate. A couple interrupted their conversation to stare at the pair with poorly concealed curiosity. An elegant lady leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both chuckle quietly. Nora, feeling the weight of the eyes upon her, squeezed her father's hand. "Daddy, I don't think we should be here." Jonas leaned down and replied gently, without hesitation. "Trust me, sweetheart. Tonight, we have a reason." The maitre d' hesitated before leading them to a table near the large windows. On the way, waiters avoided eye contact, as if their presence were an inconvenience. Only the waitress, Naomi, approached them with a sincere smile. "Good evening. May I bring you some water to start with?" It was the first gesture of dignity that night. When she returned with the pitcher, the girl named Nora, still shy, let her eyes wander toward the dessert display. There was a small cake, simple compared to the elaborate tarts and the golden mousses adorned with gold leaf. Her eyes sparkled. She tugged at her father's sleeve, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, could we maybe ask for that cake?" The father, a humble man named Jonas, didn't answer right away, but the waitress caught the request. "I'll bring it for you myself," she said before he could even attempt an apology. That was when the manager, Martin Hale, intercepted her with coldness. "Naomi, don't waste your time. They don't belong in this place." She raised her chin, steady. "They're customers, Martin. They deserve to be treated with respect." The manager smirked with disdain. "If the owner finds out you wasted product on people who can't pay, I won't be the one taking the fall." The waitress refused to be intimidated. She went to the display, picked up the cake, and brought it to the table. The girl's father pulled a thin candle from his pocket, humble, but all he could afford. He placed it on the dessert and lit it carefully. Father and daughter looked at each other and took a deep breath, hoping the moment could remain intimate, unseen by anyone else. And then they began to sing softly, timidly, almost in secret, the happy birthday that echoed through the hall. Nora clapped her hands slowly, her cheeks flushed with both embarrassment and joy. Jonas smiled, and in that instant, it seemed as if he carried the entire world in his chest. Some guests laughed, others shook their heads, uncomfortable with a scene that broke etiquette. But there were also those who were silently moved. Naomi, the young waitress, remained nearby, her eyes brimming with tears. And at the back of the hall, the distinguished lady, nearly invisible at her table, opened a small leather notebook and wrote down every detail. Her eyes followed the scene like an orchestra under the command of a careful conductor. There was something in that room that others preferred to ignore, but not her. And as the tiny candle flame faded under the girl's timid breath, the hall of Maison Aurelia still simmered in silence. Everyone had seen it, everyone had felt it, but no one imagined the consequences of that scene. What would happen after such a humble celebration? Before we continue with the unfolding of this story, write in the comments, dignity, and don't forget to leave your like. The atmosphere in the hall was still uneasy after the improvised birthday. The small cake had already been shared, and father and daughter sat in silence, trying to prolong that simple moment. It was as if they were seated at the very center of the hall and, at the same time, outside of it, invisible, forgotten, ignored. That was when the waitress, Naomi Calder, reappeared. She wasn't just carrying a tray, she carried a presence. She set down 2 glasses of fresh water and leaned slightly toward Nora. "Are you enjoying the cake?" she asked gently. The girl looked at her in surprise. She wasn't used to anyone actually caring about her answer. She gave a small smile and nodded. "Yes, it's very good." The waitress gave her a discreet wink and then turned to Jonas. "Would you like anything else?" Jonas hesitated. He felt the weight of shame. He didn't want to expose that his wallet couldn't keep up with the prices on that menu. "Don't worry. This has already been more than enough." But Naomi insisted. "No, no." She lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "I'll bring a simple dish from the house, courtesy of a friend." Father and daughter agreed to the offer, though a little embarrassed, as if they were already used to accepting whatever was given. It was at that moment that Martin Hale, the manager, appeared like a shadow, speaking harshly to the waitress. "Naomi, what do you think you're doing?" She straightened up, without looking away. "I'm serving customers." Martin let out a short laugh, dripping with venom. "Customers? Look at them. They're not going to spend anything, you know that. It's a waste of time." The waitress, however, did not back down. "I'm not asking for your opinion, Martin. They're going to have dinner. Something simple. I'll pay for it." For a second, the two locked eyes in silence. Then Martin stepped back, muttering through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this." Naomi took a deep breath, regained her calm, and turned back to Jonas and Nora. "Don't worry. It's just a simple dish, but, sometimes, the simplest things are the most valuable." Jonas swallowed hard, his eyes misty. "Miss, we have no way to thank you." Naomi only smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the entire table. As she walked away toward the kitchen, Martin watched her from afar, his eyes sparking with rage. The hall carried on with its symphony of luxury, but at that table, for the first time, someone had chosen the melody of compassion. Would the waitress's gesture have a happy ending, or would it bring some unforeseen consequence that night? Time seemed to move slowly at Jonas and Nora's table. Nora, curled up in her chair, looked around with the mix of shame of someone who knows they don't belong, yet was savoring every moment. That was when Naomi returned. This time, not with water or bread. On the tray rested a steaming dish, simple yet impeccable, a pale risotto, sprinkled with fresh herbs on top, accompanied by small grilled vegetables that released a gentle aroma. Nothing extravagant, nothing that stood out for its price, but prepared with the same care as any dish leaving the Maison Aurelia kitchen. She set the plate down in front of Jonas and a smaller one in front of Nora, whose eyes widened in surprise. "It's just something light, to warm the evening." "I hope you like it," Naomi said, almost in a whisper, as if offering a gift hidden from the world. Jonas hesitated, embarrassed. "But we can't pay for this." "Don't worry," she answered firmly. "It's on the house." The word house rang almost like irony, because for many there, that table wasn't seen as part of the hall, but as a nuisance. Even so, Nora picked up her fork with trembling hands. When she tasted the first bite, her eyes lit up as if she had been given the greatest banquet of her life. Around them, customers watched. Some pursed their lips in disapproval. Others, however, quickly looked away, embarrassed, unable to admit that something so simple could be so moving. But that moment of tenderness didn't last long. Suddenly, a firm hand grabbed the waitress's arm. Manager Martin Hale had approached in silence and now pulled her aside, his face twisted with fury. "Have you lost your mind?" he growled through clenched teeth. "Are you serving free dinners now?" Naomi tried to pull her arm free, keeping her posture straight. "It's just a simple dish, Martin. It's not going to bankrupt the restaurant." The manager leaned in even closer, almost pressing his face against hers. "You don't understand. It's not about the dish, it's about the image. If the owner finds out, your career is over. I'll call him right now." The threat fell like thunder, but Naomi did not back down. "Go ahead and call. I'd rather be fired than mistreat a child on her birthday." Martin narrowed his eyes. "You asked for this yourself." And he stepped away, already pulling his phone from his pocket, his eyes blazing with rage. And, at the back of the hall, the distinguished lady remained attentive. Her fingers calmly slid across the small leather notebook, recording every detail. She knew something was unfolding and noted it down as if collecting evidence of a truth others tried to erase. At that moment, Maison Aurelia was no longer just a luxury restaurant. It had become a stage. And the question that echoed in silence was inevitable. What would happen after the waitress's courageous act? Write in the comments. Do you think Naomi will really be fired, or will someone stand up to defend her? Father and daughter finished their dinner still carrying the shyness of those who didn't belong there, but warmed by the attention of the young waitress. Yet what no one in that hall knew was that behind those timid looks lay a story marked by loss and invisible scars. Jonas Mercer had never been a man of luxury. He had worked since he was young, supporting his family with dignity, until life began demanding from him mercilessly. First, he lost his wife. Nora was still little when her mother fell ill, and the girl's last memories were of cold hands holding hers in the hospital. From then on, Jonas juggled work and caregiving, trying to be both father and mother at once. And, as if that weren't enough, just weeks earlier he had received the news that shattered his routine. Dismissed without fair explanation, the victim of a superior's maneuver who preferred to accuse him of mistakes rather than admit his own failure. On an ordinary morning, suddenly, he was left without a job, without perspective, and with a daughter to raise. Still, Jonas did not give up. He kept his head high, living off temporary jobs, refusing to let Nora feel the weight of his battles. And it was precisely for this reason that night, he decided to take her to Maison Aurelia. Not for the luxury, not for the ostentation, but because it would be the first birthday without her mother. He could not bear the thought of letting the date pass unnoticed. Jonas, as he sat quietly at the table beside Nora, felt a mix of pride and melancholy. He watched her grip his hand tightly, as if she were the one lending him courage to be there. With each timid smile from his daughter, he realized that despite all the suffering, there was still room for small flashes of joy, and that alone was enough to give him strength. The girl, in turn, lived that moment as if it were a precious gift. The absence of her mother still hurt, but being there, in a place so different from the simple routine they were used to, made her heart tremble with emotion. She didn't care about the curious stares. She cared only about seeing her father trying to make her happy, and that attempt was for her the proof of an unbreakable love. Nora, even at her young age, carried within her a quiet strength. She was resilient, adaptable, smiling to encourage her father while silently hiding her own longing. That night, however, even as she sensed the judgmental glances, she also knew there was something special about simply being there, at her father's side. On the other side of the hall, Naomi Calder observed more than she let on. A waitress out of necessity, but an observer by nature, she noticed details most people ignored. She didn't need words to understand. She saw in Jonas's eyes the exhaustion hidden behind his facade, saw in Nora's gestures the absence of a mother's presence, and it touched her in a very particular way. Naomi also knew the weight of responsibility. The daughter of a widowed seamstress and the older sister of a teenager who still dreamed of finishing school, she carried her household survival on her shoulders. She studied sociology at night, believing that one day she could use her knowledge to fight against the inequalities she witnessed every day. But until then, her spotless black and white uniform and her modest paycheck were what kept food on her family's table. And that was why, when she looked at Jonas and Nora's table, she didn't just see two unusual customers. She saw a story of grief, of struggle, of dignity amidst pain. In Jonas, she saw a man who, despite all his losses, still tried to give his daughter a fragment of hope. In Nora, she saw the fragile strength of a child who had learned sorrow far too soon. As Naomi discreetly picked up a glass left behind, she couldn't help but reflect on her own life. In Jonas, she recognized the same burden her own father had carried until illness overcame him. In the girl, she saw the same quiet hope she noticed in her younger brother when he dreamed of a better future. Perhaps that was why that table touched her so deeply. More than customers, she saw a reflection of her own story. Families fighting not to be lost in the middle of hardship, sustained only by the courage to remain together. The hall seemed to breathe again, but not everyone shared that rhythm. Martin Hale watched from a distance, his face hardened with fury. Arms crossed, his foot tapped impatiently on the floor, the phone still in his hand. He waited until Naomi stepped away from the table, then advanced toward her, his voice low but laced with threat. "You think you're a heroine, don't you? Well, I've already made the call. The owner will know everything, and tomorrow you won't even set foot in this restaurant." Naomi drew in a deep breath, her gaze steady. She knew the storm was only beginning. Dinner had ended, but the real battle was about to begin. What had happened in that wealthy hall so far was only the beginning of a chain of twists in the life of a father and his daughter, and in the life of a young, courageous waitress, all provoked by one insolent, malicious manager. But a figure, still camouflaged among the tables, would be the key to turning this story around. At the back of the hall, almost forgotten among the tables competing for champagne and award-winning dishes, sat Sylvie Kerr. Elegant without ostentation, upright posture and steady gaze, she wrote silently in her inseparable leather notebook. To most there, she seemed only a distinguished lady, too discreet to draw attention. But in truth, Sylvie was one of the most respected food critics in the country, a reference voice in the nation's leading fine dining publication. She had traveled the world, tasted exclusive menus in Paris, Tokyo, New York, Florence. She knew Michelin-starred chefs, awards, and trends. Yet even before all the refinement, she had never abandoned one intimate conviction. A meal is not just food, it is ritual. It is encounter, sharing, the celebration of life between people. For this reason, her sharp eyes never stopped at dishes alone, but at the relationships unfolding around them. And that night, what mattered most was not the flavor of a risotto or the texture of a dessert. It was the simple scene of a father and daughter, trying, amid awkwardness and tenderness, to celebrate a date no one else in that hall even knew. It was the courage of a waitress risking her own job to guarantee dignity for two strangers. Sylvie wrote down every detail with precision, but there was more. For the first time in many years, she was not only reporting, she was feeling. Moved by the scene, she picked up her phone and, in a low and firm voice, began narrating what she saw. Who was listening on the other side was not revealed. But her words were clear, sharp, and charged with the indignation of someone who had just witnessed injustice. Across the hall, Martin Hale was also on the phone. Unlike Sylvie, his voice was filled with anger and arrogance. He was speaking directly to the restaurant's owner, convinced he was right. "Mr. Vaughn, we need to talk. One of your employees failed in her duty. She served for free, she compromised the image of Maison Aurelia. I recommend immediate dismissal." Martin spoke loudly enough to be overheard by those nearby. He wanted Naomi to feel the weight of the threat, wanted Jonas and Nora to realize they had been the cause of an unforgivable failure. Deep down, he was already savoring victory, convinced the restaurant's prestige would never bend in favor of a waitress. But while one call carried accusations, the other carried the truth. Sylvie reported every arrogant gesture, every word of contempt, every contrast between the glitter of the crystal glasses and the simplicity of the forgotten table. And, mysteriously, that account would not go unanswered. The hall continued to pulse with its choreography of luxury. Customers ordered wines, laughter echoed, waiters hurried. But beneath the surface, something invisible was moving. Two phone calls, two versions of the same story, advanced in opposite directions, about to collide. And then the doors of Maison Aurelia opened once again. An immediate silence swept across the hall, as if the very air had been ripped from the collective lungs. Emmett Vaughn, the owner of the restaurant, had arrived. He needed no introduction. Tall, with neatly combed gray hair, a flawless dark suit, and a commanding presence. He carried himself like someone who already ruled the room simply by entering. His steps were firm, but never rushed, as if he knew that every second of silence was also a form of power. The waiters instinctively lined up. Customers whispered, leaning to get a better view. Even Martin Hale, so certain of his victory, felt his body stiffen. Emmett Vaughn looked around calmly, his eyes capturing every detail of the hall. His upright posture, serene yet firm expression, conveyed something no one could immediately name. Jonas and Nora shrank in their chairs, uncertain of what was about to happen. Naomi drew a deep breath, bracing herself for the worst. Sylvie closed her notebook, but her sharp gaze remained fixed, as if waiting for the exact moment to reveal everything. The silence seemed to vibrate, charged with expectation. Everyone knew that judgment had arrived. But no one, absolutely no one, could predict what Emmett Vaughn's decision would be. The fine restaurant, so accustomed to the etiquette of conveniences and elegantly restrained people, was about to witness the improbable for the first time, a reckoning between employees, customers, and the very owner of the place. Martin Hale, the manager, was the first to move. Anxious to reaffirm his control, he smoothed his jacket and hurried to his boss with a sycophantic smile. "Mr. Vaughn, what an honor to have you here, and such a surprise. I was just about to call, but there's been a small incident that I insist must be dealt with immediately." He shot a quick, disdainful glance at the waitress before continuing. "One of your employees, this young woman here, Naomi Calder, has crossed all limits. She served customers who couldn't pay, handed out food for free, and stained the impeccable image of this house. I regret to say it, but we cannot tolerate such conduct. I recommend her immediate dismissal." The hall murmured. The waitress drew a deep breath, standing firm even as her heart raced. Jonas and Nora sank even further into their seats, as if they themselves were guilty of what was happening. Emmett, the millionaire owner of the restaurant, however, did not respond right away. He let the silence stretch, his calm gaze sweeping across every corner of the hall. Then his deep voice rang out, steady and deliberate. "It's curious to hear your version, Martin. But do you know what surprises me? I received a phone call just minutes ago from someone who is also here tonight." The manager blinked, confused. A phone call?" Emmett continued, his tone firmer. "Yes, from someone whose word I trust more than any report. A long-time friend. A respected professional, whose vision goes beyond menus and appearances." At that moment, every eye turned toward the back of the hall. There was Sylvie Kerr, serene, closing her leather notebook. She rose with discreet elegance, bowing her head slightly toward the owner. A ripple of whispers swept across the tables. Many recognized her, others simply understood the weight of the moment. After all, it was her, the most respected food critic in the country, whose columns had the power to raise or topple reputations in just a few lines. Emmett spread his arms, as if presenting irrefutable evidence. "She is the one who told me what truly happened here tonight. Every detail. And what I heard was shameful, but not from the young waitress." The manager's face went pale. "But, Mr. Vaughn, I only meant to protect the image of the house." The owner raised his hand, cutting him off. His voice now carried a weight that echoed against the golden walls. "The image of this house is not built on crystal glasses or award-winning dishes. It is built on the way we treat those who walk through these doors, whether a Wall Street banker or a child on her birthday." He took a few steps through the hall, everyone's attention locked on him. The world is already full of arrogance. Maison Aurelia cannot become just another place where dignity is denied. What makes this restaurant recognized is not only the carefully planned menu, but human respect. With each word, the manager's embarrassment became more visible. Customers whispered, some shaking their heads in disapproval. Emmett, with the calm authority of someone who had built an empire dealing with the widest range of personalities, stopped before him and concluded, "And that is why, as of this very moment, you are fired." Shock rippled through the hall. Martin tried to react, but no words came. His flushed face betrayed his humiliation. He adjusted his jacket, shot one last furious glance at the waitress, and stormed out with heavy steps, the murmur of reproach following him to the door. When silence returned, Emmett turned to Naomi. "As for you." The waitress stood tall, though her hands trembled. "You didn't just serve a dish. You served humanity. And that is worth more than any Michelin star. As of today, Naomi Calder, you are promoted to head of the dining room. Your attitude will be the standard I want for this house." A collective sigh spread through the hall, followed by scattered, discreet applause. Naomi raised a hand to her mouth, astonished. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Mr. Vaughn, I don't know how to thank you. Keep doing what you did today. That is enough." Emmett turned to Sylvie Kerr. "And to you, my friend, my eternal gratitude. Once again your vision has shown what truly matters." She smiled softly. "Today, Emmett, the finest meal wasn't on the plate, but in the gesture." Finally, the owner walked to Jonas and Nora's table. He bent slightly to be at the girl's height and spoke in a gentle voice. "Your courage today taught me more than any powerful client ever could." He turned to Jonas. "I know life hasn't been easy, but I believe in people who carry dignity in their eyes. I'd like to offer you an opportunity with my team. What do you say to working here with us?" Jonas swallowed hard. Tears threatened to fall, but he only nodded, unable to speak. Nora smiled for the first time that night, a timid smile, but full of hope. Emmett straightened and looked over the entire hall. "Let this night serve as a lesson. More than awards, more than refined dishes, what gives this place dignity is the way we treat one another. And may we never forget that." The hall broke into restrained but sincere applause. Naomi breathed in relief. Jonas held his daughter's hand tightly. Sylvie closed her notebook, satisfied. After that unique night, Maison Aurelia would never be the same. The hall was still steeped in the echo of Emmett Vaughn's last words. The manager had left in shame, the critic had recorded everything in her notebook, and Naomi, still stunned, felt both the weight and honor of the new responsibility she had just been given. But at the center of it all were Jonas Mercer and little Nora, the unlikely pair who, on an autumn night, had transformed Manhattan's most sophisticated restaurant into the stage of an unforgettable lesson. Jonas remained seated, still trying to believe what he had just heard. A job offer. Here, at Maison Aurelia. For a moment, images of his recent life flashed across his mind like lightning. The day he was unjustly fired, the emptiness at home after his wife's passing, the struggle to hide from his daughter the times when money simply wasn't enough. And now, before so many witnesses, someone was extending a hand to him. Not in charity, but in recognition. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and held Nora's hand. "Daddy," the girl whispered, "Mom would be happy." Jonas's heart tightened. He couldn't reply. He simply stroked her hair and smiled through restrained tears. Emmett Vaughn, standing, observed them in silence. In that table he saw something no award or critic could ever buy, a true love that endures even in the midst of pain and scarcity. And it was precisely that flame he wanted to keep alive at Maison Aurelia. "Jonas," he said, approaching again, "tomorrow I want you to meet with the HR team. I'm sure your experience will be valuable. More than that, your story will be an inspiration to all of us." Jonas rose slowly, with dignity, and extended his hand to the owner of the restaurant. Not as one who begs, but as one who accepts a pact. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I promise I won't let you down." The two shook hands firmly, and the gesture drew spontaneous applause from some customers. For the first time that night, the public's gaze carried not judgment, but respect. Meanwhile, Naomi Calder watched the scene with an emotional smile. She, who minutes earlier had feared losing her job, was now recognized in front of everyone. The owner had not only preserved her actions, but had turned them into an example. But within her, more than the promotion, there was the certainty that she had done the right thing. Sylvie Kerr also smiled discreetly. Her pen had already been set aside, but deep down, she knew that night would yield one of her most powerful columns. It would not be about refined sauces or noble cuts of meat. It would be about humanity. about how, amidst calculated luxury, what truly shone was the fragile flame of a makeshift candle on top of a simple cake. She herself reflected, the best meals are not measured in stars, but in held-back tears, timid smiles, and gestures of dignity. The night was drawing to a close. Nora, now fed and warm, rested her head on her father's shoulder. She was tired, but happy. Jonas looked at her and realized that, even without expensive gifts or grand parties, this had been his daughter's most meaningful birthday. Because it wasn't just about celebrating another year of life, it was about regaining faith that there was still goodness in the world. Emmett turned to the hall and spoke aloud, as if sealing a new era. Let everyone learn from what we witnessed here today. Maison Aurelia is not just an award-winning restaurant. It is a house of celebration. And here, everyone, absolutely everyone, must be treated with respect. A new round of applause echoed. Customers who had laughed earlier now clapped their hands. Others, embarrassed, preferred only to watch. But no one left indifferent. Jonas took his daughter's hand and slowly walked toward the exit, greeted by Naomi and Sylvie along the way. The waitress leaned down and whispered to Nora, "You are very brave. Never forget that." The girl smiled, holding the tiny metal of the extinguished candle as if it were an invisible trophy. As they crossed the restaurant doors, Jonas felt something different in his chest. He no longer carried the weight of shame, but the lightness of restored dignity. He didn't yet know what the future would hold, but he was certain that night had changed everything. Inside, Naomi adjusted her apron with a new sparkle in her eyes. Sylvie was already putting her notebook away, ready to write a piece that would move thousands. And Emmett Vaughn, steady and serene, had just reaffirmed the true legacy of his restaurant, humanity. The cold Manhattan wind wrapped around them as they stepped outside. Jonas squeezed his daughter's hand, and she, still drowsy, murmured, "Daddy, this was the best birthday ever." He smiled. "And it's only the beginning, Nora. Only the beginning." In life, we all face moments when we are judged by appearances. But true greatness is not in expensive clothes or titles, but in the respect we offer and the dignity we choose to uphold. And you? Have you ever lived a moment when a simple act of kindness changed everything? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our moving stories.